Our first anniversary. The 1-year mark of marriage, a milestone I had been looking forward to with so much hope and pride. I had spent days planning every detail of the evening. Reservations at the quaint Italian restaurant where we had our first date, her favorite flowers, white lilies, and a silver bracelet engraved with the words, "Forever, my love." I wanted to remind Maria of everything we had built in the past year, a symbol of the commitment and sacrifices I had made to provide a life of comfort and happiness. Maria walked into the room that evening dressed in a flowing crimson dress, the kind that made everything else around her fade away. But something was different. She wasn't smiling the way she used to. There was no warmth in her eyes, no glimmer of excitement for the evening I had prepared. It was as though she was detached, merely going through the motions. I shrugged it off, thinking she might have had a tough day at work. The evening started smoothly enough. Over candlelight and soft music, we reminisced about our early days of dating. I told her how lucky I felt to have married her. She nodded, offering a half-hearted smile. Something wasn't right, but I couldn't pinpoint what. Then, as dessert arrived and I handed her the engraved bracelet, Maria leaned in. For a fleeting moment, I thought she was going to thank me, perhaps tell me how much she loved me. Instead, she whispered, her voice calm yet cutting, "Daniel, if you don't start giving me your entire $7,000 monthly salary, I'll leave you for Adrian." My heart stopped. Adrian, my brother, the wealthy alpha who had always loomed over me like a dark shadow. He was the golden child, charming, successful, and arrogant. I didn't want to believe what I had just heard. "What?" I asked, my voice trembling. Surely, she was joking. Surely, my wife, the woman I had built a life with, couldn't be serious. Her gaze was steady, devoid of any emotion. "You heard me," she said. "Adrian can give me the life I deserve. The trips, the jewelry, the stability. If you can't match that, why should I stay?" I felt as though the ground beneath me had crumbled. My mind raced back to the sacrifices I had made for her. The sleepless nights, the career decisions I'd tailored to support our future, the dreams I had put on hold to prioritize hers. And yet, here she was, reducing our marriage to nothing more than a transaction. "No," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "I won't do it. I married you because I loved you, not because I wanted to buy your loyalty. If that's what you're looking for, you're free to leave." Maria's expression hardened. "Fine," she said, rising from the table and tossing the bracelet onto her untouched dessert plate. "You've made your choice." She left without another word, her crimson dress vanishing out the door like a cruel omen. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the empty space where Maria should have been, trying to make sense of what had just happened. By morning, the reality hit me like a freight train. Her belongings were gone. She had moved out, just as she said she would, and according to her curt text, she was now staying at Adrian's house. The betrayal wasn't just hers, it was Adrian's too. My own brother, who had always found a way to take what was mine, had now taken the woman I thought I would spend the rest of my life with. It wasn't about money or status. It was about trust, about love, about the promises we had made to each other on our wedding day. I wanted to cry, to scream, to smash every reminder of her in the house. But I did none of those things. I sat in the quiet, empty space of what used to be our home, and I resolved one thing. I would not let her or Adrian break me. If this was the kind of love Maria had to offer, then I wanted no part of it. I deserved better. The silence was the first thing I noticed when I woke up the next morning. No sound of Maria humming while making her morning coffee, no faint shuffle of her feet as she moved about the house. Just silence. It was oppressive, clinging to every corner of the home we had built together. Or so I thought. The bed felt colder than usual, a stark reminder that Maria had left. Her side of the closet was empty, save for a few hangers swinging idly, as if mocking me. Even her scent, that faint trace of jasmine she always carried, seemed to have vanished overnight. I stood there staring at the empty space, the reality sinking in. She was really gone. I made my way to the kitchen, my stomach growling despite the knot of anger and sadness tightening in my chest. The table was still set from last night, the untouched bracelet I had given her resting atop her dessert plate like a cruel joke. I picked it up, running my thumb over the engraving. Forever, my love. How naive I had been to think those words held any meaning for her. The day dragged on, each hour heavier than the last. Friends and family began reaching out, having already caught wind of what had happened. Small-town gossip moved faster than wildfire, and Maria's move to Adrian's house had only added fuel. Their reactions were worse than I anticipated. "Well, Maria just wants stability," one friend said, as if that excused her betrayal. "She deserves a better life," another offered, not so subtly implying I had failed to provide it. Even my parents, our parents, refused to criticize Adrian. "He's just helping her out," they said. Helping her out? By moving my wife into his mansion the day after our anniversary? The betrayal stung deeper than I cared to admit. Adrian had always been the golden child, the one everyone admired. I had spent my life in his shadow, working twice as hard just to be seen as half as good. And now, even my wife had chosen him over me. I stayed home that day, unable to face the world. Every corner of the house reminded me of Maria. The couch where we used to cuddle during movie nights, the kitchen where she pretended to cook while I teased her about being a terrible chef. It was all stained with memories I now wished I could erase. Emily, a close colleague, and one of the few people who understood the depth of my pain, stopped by in the evening. "You don't deserve this, Daniel," she said firmly, setting down a warm meal she had brought over. "You gave her everything, and she threw it away." Her words, though comforting, did little to dull the ache. I couldn't help but replay every moment of my relationship with Maria in my mind, searching for signs I had missed. Had I been too focused on work? Had I not shown her enough love? Or had she always been this way, and I had just been too blind to see it? The loneliness was suffocating. But more than that, it was the humiliation that crushed me. I wasn't just a man who had been left. I was the man who had been left for his own brother. Everywhere I turned, I saw pity in people's eyes, their whispers cutting deeper than any insult. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring out the window. The city lights blurred through my tears, but I refused to let them fall. Maria had made her choice. She had walked away, leaving me to pick up the pieces. But as much as it hurt, I knew one thing for certain. I wouldn't beg her to come back. I couldn't. Not after everything. I made a promise to myself as I lay in the cold, empty bed. I would move forward. I didn't know how or when, but I wouldn't let Maria or Adrian define the rest of my life. They had taken enough from me already. The days that followed were like wading through thick fog, each step forward heavy and uncertain. Life without Maria felt hollow, as if someone had reached into my chest and ripped out a vital piece of me. Yet, I couldn't stop myself from going through the motions. Work became my anchor, the only thing that gave me some semblance of structure. At the office, I buried myself in spreadsheets and meetings, trying to distract myself from the ache in my chest. My colleagues knew better than to ask too many questions. Most just offered sympathetic smiles or awkward pats on the back. I appreciated their concern, but it only made me feel more pathetic, like a wounded animal they were all tiptoeing around. Evenings were the hardest. Coming home to an empty house was a punch to the gut every single time. The silence was unbearable, and no amount of television or music could drown out the memories. Her laughter, her footsteps, even the way she used to hum while brushing her hair, all of it haunted me. I couldn't sit on the couch without picturing her curled up next to me. The bed felt twice as big and 10 times colder without her there. One night, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone, torturing myself with images of happier times. There we were at the beach, her smile brighter than the sun. Another photo showed her cradling a mug of hot chocolate, her eyes glinting mischievously as she teased me about something I couldn't even remember now. I tossed the phone aside, anger bubbling beneath the surface. How could someone who seemed so full of love and warmth turn so cold? I began avoiding family gatherings altogether. The thought of seeing Adrian and Maria together made my stomach churn. I wasn't ready to face their smug smiles or endure the whispered gossip of relatives. Daniel's wife left him for his brother, they'd say, shaking their heads in mock sympathy. No, I couldn't handle that. Not yet. Even my friends didn't know how to handle me. They'd try to cheer me up with nights out or casual lunches, but their pity was palpable. You'll bounce back, one of them said over beers one evening. You're better off without her. I nodded, pretending to agree, but their words rang hollow. None of them truly understood the depth of my pain or the humiliation I felt. Late at night, when the world was quiet, I couldn't help but replay every argument, every distant look, every moment that led us to this point. Was it my fault? Had I failed her somehow? Or was she always this shallow, and I was just too blinded by love to see it? The questions swirled in my mind, offering no answers, only more anguish. But as the days turned into weeks, something began to shift. The raw pain started to dull, replaced by a simmering anger, not just at Maria but at myself. How had I allowed her to dictate my happiness for so long? How had I given so much of myself to someone who could discard me so easily? I started to see Maria for who she truly was, not the idealized version I had clung to for years. The woman I had loved, the woman I had sacrificed so much for, was gone. Or maybe she had never existed in the first place. The realization was both liberating and heartbreaking. One evening, as I sat in the living room staring at the empty wine glass Maria had left behind, I made a decision. I couldn't change the past, but I could decide how to move forward. I wouldn't let Maria's betrayal define me. I wouldn't let Adrian's smug arrogance overshadow my own worth. It wouldn't be easy, and I knew there would be dark days ahead, but I was determined to rebuild. Maria and Adrian had taken enough from me. It was time to take my life back. A week passed, and I was beginning to find solace in my new routine. The ache was still there, but it was no longer paralyzing. I had started focusing on myself, early morning runs, long hours at work, and evenings spent reading books I had ignored for years. I wasn't healed, but I was functional. And then, my phone rang. It was Maria. Her name flashing on the screen sent a jolt through my body. I stared at it, my heart pounding. A part of me wanted to ignore it, let it ring until the call went to voicemail. But curiosity, or maybe some lingering trace of affection, made me pick up. Daniel, her voice was soft, almost trembling. I need to talk to you. I didn't respond immediately. Hearing her voice brought back a flood of emotions I wasn't ready to deal with. What do you want, Maria? I finally asked, keeping my tone steady. She hesitated. I made a mistake. That caught my attention. A mistake? I repeated, the bitterness in my voice unmistakable. You mean leaving me for Adrian wasn't the fairy tale you imagined? She let out a shaky breath. Please, Daniel, I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but I need to explain. Against my better judgment, I stayed on the line. Go ahead, I said, leaning back in my chair. I'm listening. She launched into a story that sounded like a soap opera. Life with Adrian, as it turned out, wasn't the glamorous dream she had envisioned. Sure, the wealth was there. The fancy dinners, the designer clothes, the extravagant trips, but it came with a price. Adrian, she said, was controlling. He dictated what she wore, where she went, and who she spoke to. His charm, the very thing that had drawn her in, had a sharp edge to it. I feel like I'm just another accessory to him, she admitted, her voice cracking. Something he can show off and then put away when he's done. I stayed silent, letting her words sink in. Part of me felt vindicated. This was the life she chose, the life she traded me for. And now, she was realizing it wasn't all it was cracked up to be. Daniel, she continued after a long pause, I don't know what to do. I can't live like this anymore. I miss us. I miss you. Those last words hit me like a punch to the gut. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my emotions. Maria, I said finally, you didn't just leave me. You humiliated me. You made me feel like I wasn't enough. And now, because Adrian isn't the prince you thought he was, you want to come back? I know I hurt you, she said, her voice trembling. I was selfish and stupid. I didn't realize what I had until I lost it. I wanted to believe her. A part of me wanted to forget everything and welcome her back, to pretend none of this had happened. But the scars she left were too deep. I don't know if I can trust you again, I admitted. Please, she begged. Can we meet? Just to talk? I need to see you. I hesitated. I wasn't sure if I was ready to face her, to reopen wounds that were just starting to heal. But something in her voice, desperation, regret, sincerity, made me agree. Fine, I said. We'll meet. But don't expect anything more than a conversation. Thank you, she said, relief evident in her tone. You don't know how much this means to me. As I hung up, I felt a swirl of emotions. Anger, sadness, curiosity, and a faint glimmer of hope. I wasn't sure what I was walking into, but one thing was certain. This conversation would change everything. When I agreed to meet Maria, I had no idea what to expect. Part of me wanted answers, while another part craved closure. But the scars of her betrayal were still fresh, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to face her without breaking. Still, I had to see this through, for my own peace of mind. We arranged to meet at a cafe downtown. It was one of those places we used to frequent when things were simpler, before our relationship had turned into a battlefield of ultimatums and broken trust. As I walked in, the familiar scent of coffee hit me, mingling with the soft hum of conversation. And then I saw her. Maria was sitting in a corner booth, her once impeccable appearance now slightly disheveled. She looked thinner, her face drawn, as though the weight of her choices had finally caught up with her. She spotted me and offered a small, hesitant smile. For a moment, I felt a pang of the old affection we used to share. But then I remembered why we were here. I slid into the seat across from her, keeping my expression neutral. Maria, I said, my voice steady but cool. Daniel, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you for coming. There was a long silence as we stared at each other. It was Maria who broke it. I know I don't deserve your time, she began, her hands trembling as she clasped them together on the table. But I needed to see you, to tell you the truth. I folded my arms, leaning back slightly. Go on, I said. I'm listening. She took a deep breath and launched into her story. She told me how life with Adrian had quickly turned sour. He's not the man I thought he was, she admitted. Everything with him is about control. He doesn't care about my feelings or my happiness, only how I make him look in front of others. She described the lavish lifestyle Adrian had promised her, which came with strings attached. At first, it was exciting, she said. The parties, the trips, the gifts. But soon, it felt like I was just an accessory, someone to show off when it suited him and ignore when it didn't. I listened, my expression unreadable. Her words stirred a mix of emotions, anger, pity, and a grim sense of validation. And now that the fantasy has crumbled, I said, you want to come back to the life you left behind? It's not like that, she said quickly, her voice cracking. I see now what I had with you, Daniel. You loved me for who I was, not for what I could give you, or how I made you look. I was blind to that, and I'm so sorry. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the table. Maria, I said, my tone sharper than I intended, you didn't just leave me. You humiliated me. You made me feel like I was worthless, like everything I'd done for us meant nothing. And now, after realizing Adrian isn't your knight in shining armor, you expect me to just forget all of that. Tears welled up in her eyes. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, she said, her voice trembling, but I'm asking for it anyway. I made a terrible mistake, Daniel, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make it right. I stared at her, my mind racing. Her words sounded sincere, but how could I trust them? How could I trust her? Do you even understand what you're asking? I said finally. You didn't just hurt me, Maria. You broke me. I'll do anything, she said, her tears spilling over. Just tell me what I need to do. I sat back, exhaling slowly. I don't have an answer for you right now, I admitted. I need time to think. She nodded, wiping her eyes. Thank you, she said, her voice barely audible. Thank you for giving me a chance. As I left the cafe, I felt a storm of emotions brewing inside me. Part of me wanted to believe she was genuine, that she had truly realized the gravity of her actions. But another part of me couldn't shake the memory of her betrayal. Could I ever truly forgive her? Or was this just another chapter in a story I needed to close for good? The drive home after meeting Maria was a blur. My thoughts spun in endless circles, replaying her words, her tears, and the pain I'd fought so hard to bury. She claimed to be sorry, begged for a chance to make things right. But was that enough? Was I willing to reopen old wounds for the faint hope of healing them? For days, I avoided making a decision. My mind oscillated between moments of empathy and anger. Empathy for the woman I had loved, who now appeared broken and remorseful. Anger for the betrayal she had inflicted and the audacity to ask for another chance. I knew the choice wasn't just about Maria. It was about me, my self-worth, and what I was willing to accept. Family and friends didn't make things easier. Word of Maria's plea had spread quickly, thanks to my ever-intrusive family. My mother called first, her voice soft but insistent. "Daniel, forgiveness is a virtue. Maria made a mistake, but maybe it's worth trying to rebuild. She's reaching out. It means she cares." I sighed, gripping the phone tighter. "It's not that simple, Mom," I said. "She didn't just make a mistake. She chose Adrian over me. She broke everything we built and then expected me to pick up the pieces." "Well, people can change," she pressed. "Maybe she truly regrets it." I wanted to believe that, but I couldn't ignore the gnawing suspicion that her regret stemmed more from her crumbling relationship with Adrian than any real epiphany about our marriage. As if on cue, my sister chimed in a day later, echoing my mother's sentiments. "Come on, Daniel," she said. "You loved her once. Can't you at least try to forgive her? It's what a good man would do." But was being a good man synonymous with being a fool? I had spent so much of my life trying to live up to others' expectations, trying to be the dependable one, the steady one. And where had that gotten me? Betrayed, humiliated, and alone. I realized I couldn't let guilt or pressure dictate my decision. When Maria called again, I agreed to meet her once more. This time, I knew I needed to be clear and firm, for both of our sakes. We met in the same cafe, but the atmosphere felt different. The first time, I had been caught off guard, still grappling with the weight of her words. Now, I felt more centered, more in control. Maria greeted me with a tentative smile, her eyes searching mine for some sign of hope. I gave her none. "Thank you for meeting me," she began, her voice careful, almost hesitant. I nodded, cutting straight to the point. "I've thought about what you said," I began, my tone steady but unyielding. "And I need to be honest with you, Maria. I can't go back. I can't undo what you did, and I can't pretend it didn't break something fundamental between us." Her face fell, the hope draining from her expression. "Daniel, I know I hurt you, more than I can ever make up for, but I want to try. I want to prove to you that I'm not that person anymore." I shook my head. "This isn't just about proving yourself. It's about trust. It's about respect. And you destroyed both of those things when you chose Adrian." Tears welled in her eyes, but I pressed on. "You didn't just make a mistake, Maria. You made a choice, a deliberate, calculated choice. And now you're dealing with the consequences of that choice. But that's not my burden to carry anymore." She reached across the table, her voice trembling. "Please, Daniel. I'll do anything to fix this." I pulled my hand away, my resolve hardening. "You can't fix this, Maria. You can't undo the damage. And I won't sacrifice my dignity or my peace to try and salvage something that's beyond repair." For a moment, she looked like she might argue, but then she slumped back in her seat, defeated. "I understand," she said quietly, wiping her tears. I wish I'd seen things more clearly before it was too late." I stood, my chair scraping against the floor. "So do I said. "But we can't change the past. All we can do is move forward." As I walked out of the cafe, I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and an undeniable sense of closure. Maria's apology had brought some clarity, but it also reinforced what I already knew. I deserved better. I deserved a life built on trust, respect, and love, not ultimatums and betrayal. The day I knew I'd have to face Adrian came sooner than I wanted. A family gathering, orchestrated by my ever-meddling mother, provided the stage. She insisted it was just a casual get-together, but I knew better. Her eyes carried a subtle glint of determination, and I could tell she hoped for some kind of reconciliation between me, Adrian, and Maria. I agreed to attend, not out of hope for resolution, but to confront the storm I had avoided for too long. Walking into my parents' house that evening felt like stepping onto a battlefield. Adrian's voice carried from the living room, a confident, booming sound that always made people stop and listen. He was holding court with his usual charm, laughing at his own jokes while a small crowd of cousins and family friends hung on his every word. And there, next to him, was Maria, sipping wine and looking as though she belonged. The sight was a punch to the gut, but I steadied myself. I wasn't here to show weakness. When Adrian noticed me, his smile widened. "Daniel," he called out, his voice dripping with feigned warmth. "Good to see you, brother." I nodded curtly, resisting the urge to lash out. He crossed the room with a drink in hand, clapping me on the back like we were old friends. "Glad you could make it," he said. "Maria and I were just saying how much we've missed you." I clenched my jaw but forced a calm tone. "Funny. I didn't realize you cared." Adrian chuckled, undeterred. "Come on, Danny. We're family. No need to hold grudges." "Grudge?" I said, finally letting a bit of my frustration seep through. "Is that what you think this is?" He shrugged, his grin never faltering. "You've been distant. I get it. But let's be honest. Maria made her choice, and it wasn't personal. She just needed a partner who could give her what she deserved." The audacity of his words hit me like a slap, but I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing me react. "What she deserved," I repeated, my voice steady but sharp. "You mean someone who flaunts his wealth while treating people like disposable objects?" The room fell quiet, conversations tapering off as people began to notice the tension between us. Adrian's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second before he regained his composure. "I'm just saying, Daniel, some of us are better suited for certain roles. Maria needed stability, and I had the means to provide that. No hard feelings." "No hard feelings," I echoed. "Is that what you tell yourself to sleep at night? That you didn't betray your own brother, but simply filled a vacancy?" The crowd was fully tuned in now, their eyes darting between us like spectators at a tennis match. Adrian's charm was starting to crack, and I could see the irritation building behind his eyes. "Look," he said, his tone sharper now, "you can sulk all you want, but Maria's happy with me. She has everything she could possibly need." I took a step closer, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "Does she? Or does she have a man who cares more about his ego than her happiness? Because from where I'm standing, she looks more like a trophy than a partner." Adrian stiffened, his grin finally slipping away. Before he could respond, Maria approached, placing a hand on his arm. "What's going on?" she asked, her eyes darting nervously between us. "Nothing," I said, turning to her. "Just a conversation between brothers." I could see the uncertainty in her eyes, the cracks in her confidence that Adrian's wealth had papered over. She opened her mouth to say something, but I didn't give her the chance. "You both made your choices," I said, raising my voice slightly so the room could hear. "And I hope you enjoy the life you've built. But don't mistake my silence for weakness. I may have lost a wife and a brother, but I've gained something far more valuable: clarity." With that, I turned and walked out, leaving the stunned silence in my wake. As I stepped into the cool night air, I felt an unfamiliar sense of peace. The confrontation had been inevitable, and now that it was over, I knew I could move forward without the weight of their betrayal holding me back. The first morning after that confrontation with Adrian, I woke up feeling lighter. It was as though a weight I didn't even realize I'd been carrying had finally lifted. For the first time in months, I wasn't replaying Maria's betrayal or Adrian's smug words in my head. Instead, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't in a long time: hope. I decided that day to start rebuilding my life, not as a reaction to what I'd lost, but as an assertion of who I was without them. It began with small steps. I signed up for therapy, something I'd resisted for years, convinced I could work through my issues alone. Sitting across from a therapist and voicing my pain out loud felt like ripping off a bandage, but it was also liberating. She didn't offer quick fixes or easy solutions, but her calm demeanor and piercing questions helped me start unpacking the layers of guilt, anger, and sadness I'd been burying. At work, I threw myself into projects with a renewed sense of purpose. My colleagues noticed the change. "You seem different, Daniel," one of them remarked during a lunch break. "More confident." I smiled at the comment, realizing it was true. For too long, I had let my worth be tied to Maria's approval and Adrian's shadow. Now, I was reclaiming it for myself. Therapy helped me see patterns I hadn't before. How I'd always been the one to compromise, to bend, to sacrifice. It wasn't just with Maria. I'd spent my entire life trying to please everyone around me, from my parents to my friends. No more. I started setting boundaries, saying no when something didn't align with my values or priorities. It was difficult at first, but with each boundary I enforced, I felt a little stronger. Reconnecting with old friends became another cornerstone of my new beginning. I reached out to people I drifted away from during my marriage, and to my surprise, most of them welcomed me back with open arms. One of those friends, Ben, invited me to join a hiking group he'd started. At first, I was hesitant. I'd never been much of an outdoorsman, but I decided to give it a shot. The fresh air, the physical exertion, and the camaraderie of the group became an unexpected source of joy. On those trails, surrounded by nature, I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't known in years. As I focused on myself, my professional life flourished. I took on a leadership role at work, spearheading a project that not only impressed my boss, but also garnered recognition from industry peers. The promotion that followed wasn't just a career milestone. It was a validation of my worth, completely independent of Adrian's wealth or Maria's approval. Through all this, I found myself smiling more, laughing more, living more. And then, seemingly out of nowhere, I met Evelyn. She was a new member of the hiking group, introduced by Ben. Her warmth and kindness struck me immediately, but it was her down-to-earth nature that drew me in. She didn't seem impressed by titles or material wealth. Instead, she talked about her passion for teaching and the joy she found in simple things, like a well-made cup of coffee or a good book on a rainy day. At first, I was cautious. My wounds from Maria were still healing, and the thought of opening myself up again was daunting. But Evelyn didn't push. She listened, she laughed, and she showed up, consistently and genuinely. Our friendship grew slowly, and with time, I began to trust her. More importantly, I began to trust myself. One evening, after a particularly long hike, we sat together watching the sunset. "You've come a long way, Daniel," she said, her voice soft but steady. "You should be proud of yourself." Her words stayed with me long after that night. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel that pride, not just for surviving the betrayal, but for thriving despite it. I had taken the pain and used it as fuel to rebuild my life on my own terms. And for that, I was grateful. When life starts to rebuild itself piece by piece, it often comes with unexpected opportunities. For me, it began with a chance encounter on a Thursday morning. I was grabbing coffee at my usual spot when I bumped into an old acquaintance, Thomas, someone I hadn't seen since my college days. Back then, Thomas had been a bit of a dreamer with big plans for the tech industry, and judging by the sleek suit and confident demeanor, he had clearly turned those dreams into reality. "Daniel? Is that you?" he asked, a smile breaking across his face. We spent a few minutes catching up, and when he heard about my recent promotion and career progress, his expression turned thoughtful. "You know," he said, "I've been looking for someone to help lead a project at my company. It's a risk, but the potential is huge. Interested?" A few months earlier, I might have hesitated, fearful of stepping out of my comfort zone. But now, I saw it as an opportunity to expand, to grow. I told him I'd think about it, but deep down, I already knew my answer. After a weekend of mulling it over, I called Thomas and accepted the offer. The role was a significant departure from what I was used to. More creative, more demanding, and far more rewarding. It required me to relocate temporarily to a bustling city, but I welcomed the change. It felt like stepping into a new chapter, leaving behind the echoes of my old life for something fresh and promising. The project was intense from the start. Long hours, tight deadlines, and plenty of challenges tested my patience and determination. but it also brought a sense of fulfillment I hadn't felt in years. The team I worked with was talented and driven, and their energy was infectious. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was building something meaningful, something that mattered. Amid the professional whirlwind, Evelyn remained a steady presence in my life. Despite the distance, she reached out regularly, texts, calls, and occasional visits. One weekend, she surprised me by showing up in the city with a care package of homemade snacks and my favorite book. "Thought you might need a break," she said, her smile warming a part of me I hadn't realized was cold. Her thoughtfulness reminded me of what I had been missing in my marriage to Maria. Evelyn didn't demand or manipulate. She simply cared, and that care came through in ways big and small. It was refreshing, and I found myself opening up to her more with each passing day. The success of the project exceeded everyone's expectations, including mine. Our work garnered attention from major players in the industry, and Thomas made good on his promise to recognize my contributions. I received an offer to stay on permanently, along with a significant pay increase and the freedom to explore more leadership roles within the company. During this time, I also started attending industry events and networking with influential people. One such event led to a speaking engagement where I shared my experiences in business and the lessons I'd learned about resilience. It wasn't just about professional growth. It was about proving to myself that I could rise above the shadows of my past. Evelyn was at the event, sitting in the front row. As I spoke, I caught her eye and saw the pride on her face. Afterward, she came up to me, beaming. "You were amazing," she said. "It's inspiring to see how far you've come." Her words struck a chord. I realized that my journey wasn't just about leaving Maria and Adrian behind. It was about rediscovering my worth and finding someone who truly appreciated me for who I was. One evening, as Evelyn and I walked through the city's vibrant streets, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. "I'm not sure where this is going," I told her, my voice hesitant but hopeful. "But I'd like to find out." She smiled, slipping her hand into mine. "So would I." 1 year after that fateful anniversary where Maria's ultimatum shattered my world, I found myself standing on the balcony of my new home. The view was breathtaking, a sweeping panorama of the city's skyline bathed in golden sunlight. It was a stark contrast to the darkness I had endured, a vivid reminder of how far I had come. Maria's betrayal no longer haunted me. Instead, it had become a lesson, a turning point that forced me to confront my insecurities, rediscover my strengths, and rebuild a life rooted in authenticity. The scars she left had healed, leaving behind a sense of resilience I never knew I possessed. That morning, I received an email from Maria. It was short, almost apologetic in tone, though it lacked the directness I had hoped for. She admitted she had made mistakes and regretted the choices that had led her to leave me. She wrote about Adrian's controlling ways and how their relationship had crumbled under the weight of their own pretenses. In a final, poignant line, she confessed, "I often wonder if I gave up the best thing I ever had." I read the email twice, then set it aside. It wasn't that I didn't care. It was that I had moved beyond needing her validation. Maria's regrets were hers to carry, just as my healing was mine to cherish. I didn't feel anger or satisfaction, just a quiet acknowledgement that I no longer owed her or her memories a place in my life. Evelyn, meanwhile, had become a constant in my life. She was thoughtful, genuine, and unwaveringly supportive. A stark contrast to the manipulation and ultimatums I had endured with Maria. Our relationship was still in its early stages, but it was built on mutual respect and understanding. She didn't try to fix me, nor did she expect me to be anything other than who I was. With her, I felt seen, valued, and, for the first time in years, hopeful. My career continued to thrive. The project I had worked on with Thomas had opened doors I hadn't thought possible, and I found myself in high demand within the industry. I began mentoring young professionals, sharing not just technical expertise, but also lessons about perseverance and self-worth. My story became a source of inspiration for others, proof that adversity could lead to growth. One evening, as Evelyn and I prepared dinner together, she turned to me and said, "You seem so at peace, like you've finally found your balance." I paused, considering her words. She was right. I had stopped looking back, stopped wondering about the what-ifs and the could-have-beens. My focus was entirely on the present and the possibilities ahead. For the first time in a long time, I felt whole. The story didn't end with a dramatic gesture or a grand reconciliation. It ended with quiet contentment. I wasn't chasing closure or revenge. I had simply chosen to live, to thrive, and to find joy in the little moments that made life worth living. As I stood on that balcony, watching the city lights flicker to life, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the pain, the lessons, and the growth. Maria and Adrian were distant memories, shadows of a past that no longer defined me. The future was mine to shape, and I was ready to embrace it with open arms. Ready for dinner? Evelyn called from the kitchen, her voice full of warmth. Absolutely, I replied, turning away from the view and stepping into the life I had rebuilt. A life filled with love, respect, and endless possibilities.